Matt Tebby. It's just the two of us today for this section of the podcast, which sometimes happens. Various trips. People are on vacations sometimes. People are out on mission trips sometimes. I think that's what's happening right now. So, but anyway, we wanted to, every once in a while, we like to do an episode like this where we will just chat about a topic of interest without a guest. And today we wanted to chat about a listener question. Somebody sent in a listener question. This was, I can't remember how you said this one came in, Matt. I don't know if this was an email or
it was an email to me. A woman named Marge sent it in.
Marge. Here's Marge's question. Have you ever considered writing something on people finding a place in the body of Christ after pastoral or clergy sexual abuse? Sometimes we don't have options to find a church with a woman pastor, so we have to find a new way to walk in some form of community with the male side of Jesus' community of believers. I know that you may not feel as a white male that you have a lot to say about this, but the longer I live and experience church culture, the longer I truly believe that change will only come from the voice on your side of the fence. And I think she's referring to you as a man, as a white man.
Also clergy, I think.
And yes, you fit all of those boxes. Yeah, as do I. And then she also, a later message said that I would also like to say that communities like Gravity Commons offer a healing option for people struggling to find and trust a regular church setting again after abuse. I have plugged into Woodland Hills Church, which also has a wonderful online community, and these types of communities are a vital part of the journey towards healing. So anyway, we just wanted to chat a little bit about that rather than take the time to write about it. Sometimes topics like this, I think, work better as a conversation.
Yeah.
So, how would you begin to answer that question, Matt? I hear Marge sort of struggling with, I've had a bad experience in the church. I've had, this experience of abuse in the church, and it's hard to know how to plug into a church community after that.
Yeah. Well, I'll say that we may have commented on this in passing during other episodes, but I've never written about this and we haven't podcasted about this until now because I am cautious as like you said, a white male pastor, of speaking to people who have been, and her words is pastoral sexual abuse, speaking to people who've been harmed by pastoral sexual abuse about how to find another church. And the reason why I'm reticent or hesitant to do that is because too often what I see pastors and clergy doing is trying to bypass evil, wickedness, and pain that people have experienced in the church and moving directly towards the solution to your injury, to your abuse, is to find a good church. And so it functions a bit to not reckon with the actual harm or wrong that's done, and B, push people back towards an environment that they experienced trauma in. Which is not wise. Sorry, it's not kind. And 3, it serves and functions to sort of police people. I've used this this analogy before, but this is what it feels like to me to do something like this. Imagine, Ben, you and I are in a hallway, and we are walking past a room, and in the room there's a group of women sitting in a circle, and the sign on the door of the room says domestic and intimate partner violence support group. And as we listen, we hear a bunch of women who've experienced domestic or intimate partner violence, and we hear a number of them have divorced their partners that were violent towards them. And I think as two people who are married and who believe in the sacrament of marriage, we both know that that is not the time or the place to pop in and give an unsolicited sales pitch for how, even though you experienced a bad marriage, marriage is still good.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not that these people who've experienced harm and abuse, that marriage couldn't be good for them again, that there is never a time and a place for them to hear about God's purposes for marriage. It's just like in this season, at this time, in this environment, that's insensitive.
Right.
And coming from somebody in my place could be seen as being coercive and dismissive.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's an interesting, it's an interesting thing to think through, isn't it? Because when you think about, I mean, what we're doing even now is this is public content, right? And we don't get to control the environment in which people hear this. We don't get to control the context into which people are hearing this, right? And all of that kind of thing. So an article would be the same way. But there is a context. So some of that context is very personal for people. So somebody might have experienced, church abuse.
Yeah.
But then another part of that context is sort of the cultural milieu into which we are speaking, right? And so I think what you're naming is a kind of sensitivity to how your voice can come across to people who are hurting, in that position. And, even commenting on it, on how to find a church after an experience of abuse, even commenting on it, like you said, could be taken to be, inside of this larger context, to be like, oh, in the midst of this, here's the most important thing. Make sure you find another church,
Yeah. And so the other thing I was writing down about this question that I wanted to ask is, I think this question is answered differently depending upon how your church handled that clergy or pastoral sexual abuse. So if they believed you, if they paid for your counseling, if they put the pastor on leave, if they got an outside trauma-sensitive, trauma-informed organization to do an investigation, if there was, rectification and justice happening, right? If there was support and accountability and transparency, then I think finding another church means something different to you than if you don't get any of that.
Right. Yeah.
Which is way too often the case, right?
Yeah, it really is, sadly.
And so the reason I bring that up too is because the moving from your pain or what happened to you to let's move past that, or let's get you beyond that, or let's get you back to some place. Let's fix this problem. And the problem is you finding a church.
Yeah.
It really does serve to shortcut, I think, the healing process and to bypass pain. And it's frequently the instincts or the moves that the church does to the person who's experienced abuse.
Yeah.
So I'm reticent to do it because it does mirror or mimic or map onto the moves people receive from churches where they experience abuse.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's super interesting, I think, to think through it. I mean, on the one hand, there's probably a way to talk about it. I think the way that I would probably want to frame it then, because of all that, what you're saying, Matt, would be to say, if you are looking for, like, if this is something you're wanting, if this is something you're seeking, rather than trying to convince people that they should want it or should seek it.
Yeah.
Because I do think, I mean, I know a lot of people who, they are part of churches, but it is difficult for them because church triggers them in a lot of ways. But they're like working through it. They're like, oh, this is hard for me, but I want to be here. And I do experience some healing in this environment, and so I think that probably has to be part of the context is this something you're seeking? Like, is this a desire that you have? Is this, are you thinking like, I need to be plugged into a body of believers again? I know my healing is going to come through that. Well, okay, that's another issue. And we can talk about, like, let's talk about how to look, signs of a healthy church, signs of an unhealthy church.
Right. And that's what we have with Marge here. She's, moving towards us, which is one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast, is because it's not, I feel like there's less presumption here. We're responding to a question versus telling abuse survivors what they need to know.
Right. Yeah, totally. So hopefully that comes across. Like, if you're listening to this, and you are like, I don't want another church. That's fine. God bless you. We totally understand that.
Yeah.
But if you're like Marge and you're like, wait a second, I actually would like to plug back into some kind of church experience, but I don't know how to do it.
Yeah. So those are the first two things. The third thing is I do have thoughts on this, but I want to just own and name publicly that I think I've never been sexually abused by a clergy or pastor person in a church. So I've never actually had to do this.
Yeah.
So I think that my perspective could have less value and weight and importance than somebody who has.
Yeah.
Or somebody who's experienced that in a church and tried to find another one and failed. I think either the person who's experienced the abuse and found another church, or the person who's experienced abuse and hasn't, have valuable things to offer to this question. Yeah. And so that's you, listener, and you want to reach out to us, please send us an email. Yeah. Maybe we can even chat about it on the podcast at a future time. But I just want to recognize that my experience to this is not as proximate as others.
Yeah.
Fourth, it's interesting. Her second sentence, sometimes we don't have options to find a church with a woman pastor. So we have to find a new way to walk in some form of community with the male side of Jesus's community of believers. So Marge is I think trading on the fact that the vast majority, if not all, of clergy and pastoral sexual abuse happens from men.
Yes.
And I don't think that's just because men make up a larger percentage of pastors in America or the world. Yeah. I think there's something deeper than it's not just a numbers game here.
Right. It mirrors the pastor numbers mirror the numbers probably in the general population.
Probably.
Right? So the overwhelming, I don't have the stat in front of me, but I'm 99% certain that the overwhelming majority of anybody who commits any kind of sexual abuse is a male. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. But I think there's something underneath that's worth just naming. And that is, if I'm going to begin to explore what would it look like for someone to find a church after that, one of the things that churches who will consider and actually do hire women pastors, one of the things that is more likely to be different about that church is that that they've done some work with the authoritarian hierarchical structures that the church has often operated in, that I'm convinced are overwhelmingly not safe for women and children.
Yeah.
Or even anybody who's not like a white cisgendered male.
Yeah.
These structures are not as safe for them as places that are less authoritarian and less hierarchical.
Yeah. Yeah. And the presence of a woman pastor is, I hear you naming, it's not a guarantee that you've really dealt with all of that.
Nope.
But it is an indication that there is a desire to deal with it, or at least an attempt to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, it's like one of those artifacts of like, okay, it's not a slam dunk, but now I've got some indication that this could be an environment or a culture that where abuse isn't normalized, hidden, celebrated.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. I mean, I know a lot of women pastors who talk about the structures that they are still up against, even though they're installed, ordained, they're in position as the pastor, but they're still up against these patriarchal structures, in the minds of people, all kinds of things that they bump up against. But I think there is, them being in that position, a woman being in that position is going to see and be able to reckon with those things in a much greater way than a man in those positions. Because there's a lot of this stuff that, I had to learn how to see.
Yeah.
I didn't automatically see it, but women in that position are usually very much like, oh yeah, I see this right away. So
yeah. I forget what number we're on, Ben.
I don't know. Maybe you said 4, 5, but I don't know. It doesn't matter.
Number 8.
It probably doesn't matter. Number
no. Somebody will know what number we're on, and that'll really bother them. I think we're on 5.
Okay.
6. Okay. The next. Yeah. In addition to the previous list, I would say that one of the things that I've noticed increasingly in the last 10 years is the way that trauma from other environments in my life shows up in the local church.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? So, so I've experienced trauma in my family of origin, in a ministry position. So I have what's known as complex PTSD. It's not a slam dunk that if you were sexually abused by a pastor, your body would store that and read that as trauma, but it's likely.
Right.
It's it wouldn't be surprising if you had trauma, right? So one of the things that I would just suggest or recommend to like a friend or even to Marge is to be in a relationship with a trained professional who is able to help you process and deal with your trauma.
Yeah.
Now that may go without saying, but increasingly I've become aware that our trauma can come online really anywhere, anytime. Doesn't ask for our permission, right. And it doesn't behave itself in ways that maybe other parts of us do. Yeah. But because the local church deals with such intimate, vulnerable, relational, core central aspects of who we are as relational beings and spiritual beings and emotional beings, I think there's a whole lot of landmines for someone who has trauma. I think it can come online rather easily.
Yeah.
In a local church. So that'd be, I don't know, that would be something I would encourage.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I think it's wise to do that, because when our trauma comes online, you're right. It doesn't behave. It doesn't announce itself as like, hey, this is something from the past that's showing up in the present in a situation that reminded you of the situation that's in the past, but it's not it's not the same situation. Like, all of that stuff that we need to like cognitively process, that it's helpful for us to process as we like, after trauma comes online, after we get triggered, for example,
right? Like
none of that is available to us in the moment. And we often need help to like understand what's happening to us, right? Because it's, again, our bodies are, the trauma comes online, your body says you're in danger, and it looks for why you're in danger, and it finds the easiest target. It finds the easiest thing that might be causing, the danger. And right. You just need help. We all need help to untangle, like, wait a second, what's really going on here for me?
Yeah. Right. And so you can take responsibility for your own reaction, your own body. You can begin to get some healing. You can take care of yourself in those environments, right? Becoming aware of what triggers me or what makes me reactive, or how my body responds in trauma. I'm better able to have boundaries and take care of myself in places that are that can be triggering. So it's not only to take care of yourself, but it's also, I think, one of the benefits of dealing with my trauma and talking to trained professionals about abuse right, is that I become more acquainted with abusive ways of relating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tactics and strategies,
Yeah.
how systems, like even how systems work, habits of systems that are make it really difficult to identify and hold accountable abusive people. And so I think the more aware we can become, the less sort of like, the worst, one of the worst things to do when looking for a church is spend a significant amount of time building deep relationships until you come into that, you see that red flag that's a non-negotiable for you, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think especially in this post-COVID world of like spiritual and relational fatigue that everybody seems to be in, it the sooner we can see, oh, this place isn't really trauma sensitive, and not only that, they don't have a desire or a value for it.
Yeah.
And so, even though these people are great and they say the right stuff, I'm not confident that this place is knows what it means to create a space where abuse is less likely to happen.
Yeah. 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 And that's like coming to see those habits and patterns. Like what's necessary is working through the things that trigger us.
Yes.
Because sometimes they are triggered by, oh, that's a bad habit or a bad pattern that I'm seeing. And sometimes it's benign. You know what I mean? Like sometimes those patterns are like, oh, well, that's, that person just has a deep voice, like the person that that hurt me, or, that kind of a thing. And so like, I think that's really good advice, because to understand what is truly dangerous and not a good situation, and what is a benign situation that, you might just need to be careful about getting triggered. Like all of that is really important to work through and figure out,
Yeah.
And it's difficult to, and most of us need help doing that.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. It's number 8, number D. I don't know what we're on.
No, I want to say too, I think, there's kind of this confluence between sort of the explosion of awareness about how abuse works. I think it's about in the last 15 years, and maybe more acutely in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
With sort of the emergence of like the Me Too movement, and how women are reclaiming power to name sexual predators or sexual abuse in their life. And then the Church Too movement. Right. And then I think you even have maybe more peripheral movements that also name how power is misused, like Black Lives Matter. And I think that's injected into the nomenclature, into pop culture, words like narcissist, words like acronyms like DARVO, words like gaslighting, right? Yeah. And I don't think we had any of these words. People who weren't trained professionals didn't say DARVO 15 years ago.
Right.
And so I think what that's done is that's created, and that has gone on with sort of the emergence of and propagation of online communities like Gravity Commons, where people kind of find each other. There's a lot of Facebook groups I'm a part of where sex abuse survivors in a church, from churches, where they find each other. And I'm a pastor of a local church. I love our local church. We're not going to be there this Sunday, Ben. We're going to be traveling together, and I'll miss our local church. But I'm not one of those pastors who makes like black and white hard lines around what constitutes a church. Maybe I should. I'm an Episcopal priest. You got to be where the sacrament's celebrated, or else it doesn't count. But I mean, I think there are spaces that don't consider themselves a church that function like a church.
Yeah.
Especially for people who are moving tentatively towards healing and maybe some kind of hope that they could believe again.
Yeah.
Right. And so even though Marge, I think, is talking about a local physical church, right, that
Mhm.
meets in a physical location,
Right.
I don't want to disparage or belittle these
Yeah.
little micro expressions of church that don't even use that word.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, there's, setting the theological, sort of question aside. I think from a pastoral and an experiential standpoint, what you're saying is really important. That there's ultimately there is a need, I think, to be able to connect, and that's one of the good things about, you hear a lot about the bad things about social media, and I agree with them. There are, what I mean, like, there's super problematic bad things about the way that we connect online and how it's been kind of weaponized against our own brains and all of that kind of thing. But there's also some goodness in people being able to connect across time and space that they weren't able
Yes.
to do before. You know what I mean? There's relatives and loved ones, who live in different countries who can connect, by text message and WhatsApp, and all of these other
Yes.
things that you can connect. And there's these
Twitter
online communities.
Spaces and yeah,
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is a big part of our, our recent rebrand from Gravity Leadership to Gravity Commons was realizing that, I think one of the things that's began to happen is that Gravity was becoming a place, an online community.
Yeah.
In a sense, a place where we could talk about these things, where people could ask, questions that would have gotten kicked out of their former church. And, there's a lot of folks who, they don't go to church, or they can't find a church that feels safe to them. And they're able to join communities like Gravity Commons that do feel safe. And, sure, it's not in person. It's not, it's not ideal. It's not maybe the fullness of what you might hope for in community, but, that doesn't need to prevent us from seeking those connections and finding goodness in them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, I know that's a whole lot of answering the question without technically answering the question so far.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, really. But I guess as I move towards answering the question, if I can just speak like really frankly for a second, I haven't found a church that's committed to hierarchy and authoritarian logics that feels safe to me. I mean, I just don't know. I mean, I'm talking about like old conservative, mostly white denominations, right?
Yeah.
And I guess I mean, they may exist. Churches in these denominations may exist.
Yeah.
I don't even think I need to name them because all the church abuse scandals are coming from them.
Yeah.
Right.
What would you say, Matt? So, churches that are committed to authoritarian, hierarchical, that kind of a thing is what you said. What would indicate to you that a church is committed to that, or a denomination is committed to that? What are some artifacts of, maybe this is part of practically answering the question of like, be careful of these kinds of churches. Like what would be some signs that you could look for that a church is committed to authoritarian leadership styles, etc.?
Yeah. I guess there's like, and I'm having to learn about this, right? So I'm in the process of trying to learn and name how this works, because Ben, you and I are Episcopal priests.
Yeah.
There are not many church structures that are more hierarchical than ours.
Right. We're inside of and inhabit a hierarchical church structure. We have a bishop who is over us.
Right.
We are over, in some ways, the congregation. Yeah.
Right.
That's true.
But the logic within the hierarchy isn't about, it doesn't run on like coercion and obedience. It runs on something different. And so I'm sort of at the end of how language works for me. I'm trying to name like aesthetics even, or logics, or implicit assumptions. But maybe one artifact is that in authoritarian hierarchies, there's big emphasis on obedience and conformity.
Yeah.
And if you deviate from, if you don't comply, or if you question authority, or if you're not a yes man, or if you bring any kind of negative feedback or criticism, it's met with defense, deflection,
Yeah.
or you are demeaned or dismissed.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So I guess one of the artifacts is what's can you disagree with the pastor?
Right.
Or
Yeah.
the leader? You know?
Yeah.
Can anybody?
And how do they respond to that? I think another artifact, and you'd have to hang out for a while maybe to see this, but can the leader apologize?
Really apologize?
Yeah. Can the leader really apologize and say, oh, you know what? I was thinking this, even for small things. I think that's a good sign too. Like, can the leader apologize for small things, not like huge mistakes. I mean, that'd be good to apologize for too. But even like small things, I think, like it's one of the things that I have learned to look for in a leader, because I've been part of organizations that were led by people that eventually I realized, I was like, you know what? This person never apologizes for anything, not even something really minor, really small, wouldn't even be a big deal to apologize for it. They just can't do it.
Right.
It's a bad sign.
Yeah, it is a bad sign. Yeah.
I think that's good. Anything else?
I mean, do leaders really empower others?
Mm-hmm.
Or is there sort of a consolidation and a coalition building? Right. So to me, it's like are people empowered can other people like carry real authority in the church? A few other thoughts, like, is there an explicitly publicly named reporting of abuse policy? Do they have, is it posted somewhere? Do leaders have to go through training on how to identify sexual abuse, especially with children? And is that training, like, are they public about it? Like, these are some things that, up until 10 years ago, we didn't really do as a church, because it was, I don't know, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I guess this stuff can't happen in a church. We better do something about this,
Right. Yeah. We realized we can't just rely on everybody's, good intentions or, horror at the thought of it. It's like, well, it can still, we need to learn together how to actively prevent it.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons we have a co-pastoring model, distributed leadership, is because I think it's just really dangerous for one person to have all the power in a church. It's just, I don't know. I got two people at any point who can call me on my crap, and I feel like I need that.
Yeah.
And Ben, you need that. No, we all need that. We all need that, right? So like, I just think that's how is power, how is authority held, how is it used? I mean, I've got friends who recently came out of a church that had lots of co-pastors, but anytime they disagreed with, like, there was a whole lot of sort of enmeshment and groupthink and weird kind of manipulative energy that happened in the church. And it was just as gross as like a top-down dictatorial kind of one person leading. Now, I don't think there was any sex abuse in this church, but I'm just saying, not a structure. There's no structure that's perfect.
Right.
But I do think that things like accountability and transparency, and like becoming trauma informed, becoming like informed about abuse and how to spot it, having policies like we have a policy in our church that adult is never to be left alone in a room with a child during a church function. Like, at any given time, there needs to be 2 adults in a room with children at every time.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't happen, let's say that doesn't happen and there is an adult in a room with a child while there's an official church thing happening, that needs to get reported even if nothing happens. Right?
Yeah.
So like there's a sense in which like we're building a culture that knows how to identify warning signs for abuse, and we can prevent even the opportunity for abuse to happen together.
Yeah, those are some ways. I think that's good. Those are some things to look for that seem to indicate. I mean, sometimes it's really hard to tell until you're there for a while, that's the hard part about this, is there's no, there's like no perfect vetting process that will guarantee, oh, this is a safe place for you to be. And I think that there's also a personal element to this as well, where I think there are things about churches that aren't necessarily explicitly harmful, but there might be things about a church that just might not be helpful for you.
Yeah.
And so Marge mentioned, it sounds like her desire would be to go to a church with a woman pastor, but she can't find that right now. But that might be a deal breaker for some other people. And it's like that's okay if that's a deal breaker, and you need to you need to listen to that if that's super important to you. Some of these things are personal, and that's okay to have a list, of deal breakers for yourself.
Yeah.
So,
and I guess I just maybe close on this. So the question is, writing something on people finding a place in the body of Christ after pastoral clergy and sexual abuse. And when I read that question, I come back to Jesus saying, "Woe to those who make one of these little ones to stumble. Mm-hmm. It is better for them to be thrown into the sea with a millstone tied around their neck than to do this." And I think of Jesus holding children on his lap. And so maybe as a word, like the person who sexually abused you, they left the body, you didn't. And so part of the damage done in sexual abuse is that the abused feel like they're the one in the middle of the sea with the millstone.
Yeah.
Not the one on the lap of Jesus. Yeah. Now, I know that could be used as like a bypassing statement. Hey, cheer up. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that that the Lord is near to the brokenhearted. And I know it can be hard to experience that when your body still screams in pain. And I'm sorry. That is harder to experience, or maybe even impossible for you to experience because of what's been done to you. I guess what I want to maybe just propose is that a lot of those who are harassed and helpless, like and who've been harmed and injured, I hope will one day discover that they are nearer to God than they ever could have imagined.
Yes. Well, amen. Maybe that's a good place to wrap this one up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the body of Christ, the resurrected body of Christ bears holes and scars. And so there's a place in the metaphysical, the cosmic body of Christ for those of us who have holes and scars. We belong.
Yep.
We belong there.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, because Christ is going there.
yeah, because that Christ has, in his mercy, I think, decided that his resurrected body would have holes and scars.
Yeah.
So I guess those scars are real. And many times they lead to like some sort of spiritual death. But it's possible even in that grave for life to emerge. So, yeah.
All right. Well, listener, thanks for joining us on this little conversation.
Yeah.
Had about this question.
Marge, thanks for the question. And again, friends, if you have, maybe you've done this, or maybe you've tried to do this and have been unsuccessful, or maybe you know people who have. If you want to comment or opine, feel free to send us a message at podcast@gravitycommons.com, and we'll visit with you next time.
Yep. Peace, friends.